6 months ago, I made a video on the Kevitz Gambit, which is the opening that you see on your screen right now. And this is a very rare, but very powerful opening that you can use against the Ruy Lopez. And I'm bringing it back up today because I just played an international master on Lichess, and I wanted to showcase this game just to kind of put the Kevitz Gambit back on the map, but also to highlight just how dangerous this can be. And even really strong players, if they're not prepared for it, and why would they be prepared for it? Nobody's ever played this Gambit. They might even mess up right away in the opening, and I want to just kind of highlight this with a really nice instructional game that I just played. Now, what is the Kevitz Gambit, you might be asking? Well, this is something that you can play against the Ruy Lopez, and if your opponents play knight f3, you play knight to c6, they play bishop to b5, you can play the move g6. This is the fianchetto variation of the Ruy Lopez, and it's not like a ridiculous move. This is something that Magnus Carlsen has played, this is something that a lot of strong grandmasters have played, but it's definitely not the most common choice for black on this turn. However, if you look at the Masters database, you will see that c3 is definitely by far and away the most popular choice by white. So my opponent is an international master. Of course, he probably knows a little bit of theory, but is he ready for the Kevitz Gambit? That is the test that we want to see. Now, this is pawn to f5, which was not when you played g6, opponents don't think the idea is to play f5, but this turns out to be a very dangerous weapon. As I hope to show. Now, I will just point out, I say that nobody's played it, I say it's really rare. Well, 6 months ago when I made that video, 25,000 people watched it. Thank you to everybody that did watch it. There were 25 total games in the database. That's it. Like, nobody is playing this. Now, today, 6 months later, there are 247 games in the database. So it's gone up by about tenfold, which is incredible. Thank you to everybody that's playing it. But you'll also see, even though this line is a little bit dubious, how could f5 be the correct move? There's no way a computer would ever play it. You see that it scores pretty well for black, 53% for black compared to 44% for white. So obviously there's something dangerous about it, and let's dive a little bit deeper to see if we can understand. A link to the video if you want to see it. Here's like the tidy up part of the video. If you want to actually see the analysis, there'll be a link to it. I'm also going to leave a link to the Vampire Chicken channel if you want to. That's my second channel. That's my gaming channel. If you want to see my actual thoughts, I was recording this game, but this is just going to be the analysis of it. Go check out the Vampire Chicken channel if you want to see the actual game being played. But this was it. This was me going up against an IM, and he decided to take on f5, which is definitely the most common choice. But here is why this position can be so dangerous. After e4, most opponents will mess up in this position, and it's only about 10% of the time that opponents actually come up with the only move actually for white to keep any sort of advantage. And if you play anything else, it's very easy to go wrong with white. Now, what my opponent probably thought, if you've never seen this before, I think it's very logical to think as white. My knight is attacked, I should probably move it, and the square I would most like to occupy is the d4 square. However, if you go there right away, you will get doubled pawns. You can imagine that black is just simply going to be taking. However, it turns out that this is actually the best way for white to play, but most of the time, opponents are going to be taking on c6 so that they're able to play knight to d4 and avoid the doubled pawns. And that's exactly what we saw, but I'll show you how to get an advantage with black if this is what your opponents do. Now, the thing is, if opponents go to d4, and I don't want to deep dive into this too much, we've already explained it in a previous video, but the thing is, you can take back, and the reason that white is able to get some sort of advantage is that at some moments you actually will be able to play d3 and get rid of this monster pawn on e4. Now, however, it's one of those situations where, like, okay, this is bad according to the computer, but in the database, black is winning 80% of the time from here, which is kind of crazy. What seems to happen most commonly is opponents are going here. This bishop needs to go back to e2, but I guess nobody ever does. Everybody goes back to a4, which is wrong. Then you're able to play d5 and construct this monster center. And I just want to go one move deeper just to show you kind of how dangerous things can get, because after they take here, which is most popular for some reason, it's really not the time for white to get greedy. We have this idea of playing queen to g5 and going directly after this g-pawn, which is a huge issue for white. You're not able to castle kingside. This is walking into a monster attack. Not only does bishop to h3 just lead to black winning like a ton of material because you have to give up your rook, but also even just taking this g-pawn, opening the h-file so you can play queen to h4, and if ever h3, you're going to be shattering. This is already like a monster attack for black. So queen to g5 is a problem, and the reason you need your bishop on g2 is, on e2, is that you want to play g3, But if you do it in this position, now this bishop lurks in. You need this bishop on e2 to prevent this. Also, what else might you do? You might play king to f1, but this doesn't really solve all of the problems either. Black continues to develop. Notice how you're in this pin. Okay, at some moments you're going to back up. At some moments you're going to bring this knight out. You're going to be playing for a monster attack with black. So even this, it's probably good for white if they find all of this, drop back to e2 and know like a bunch of theory from here. But it looks very dangerous because you're playing d5. You're trying to recapture this guy back. And if white has to castle kingside, there's always going to be the potential for black to get an attack, even if it is a little bit dubious. However, most of the time when you play this position, your opponents are going to be taking on c6. And this is, we're back to the game now. This is exactly what my opponent did. Well, I took back on c6. And now the knight comes into d4. And here's where you might begin to see what the issue is with white. Because I play c5, hoping to get the knight to move anywhere, and my opponent didn't choose the right square, which is actually common again. Like, these are just very common mistakes that a lot of opponents of every level are going to be playing. After the knight moves away, a little bit better is going to e6, but the ideas are the same for black. I'd be able to take this, and the main idea is to play queen to d3. So wherever the knight goes, I solve some issues and I just play queen to d3. And look at this. The entire queen side is just locked out. This is like incredibly positionally winning for black because white can like never solve all of these issues quickly enough. Now, this was the better way for white to play it. This pawn is so weak that I'll win it back eventually. I can just keep castling and eventually some rook will probably come in and swoop up this pawn. It's not a big deal. But even worse is going back to b3, keeping more pieces on the board, and this is a piece that might potentially be able to get trapped in the future. Consider a5, a4. It would immediately trap the knight. So, like, it's not good to keep pieces on the board when you're this cramped, and it's especially bad after queen to d3. Now go ahead and ask your computer what's going on here. It will say black is winning. This is crushing. We're on like move 9, and I'm just insanely winning. So this is already just like a complete crush that white should not be able to get out of this bind. However, I was like really proud. Like, even if you're playing a strong player, you get a good position. And sometimes, you know, you get tricked or you let things slip. I think I did a good job here of controlling the game all the way until the very end. And it's kind of interesting because we're in the middle game. White is kind of boxed up, but even in the end game, I kind of kept them tied down. It was a really cool thing that happens. Now, my opponent tries to break free with pawn to f3. I guess he's hoping that I take the pawn or something, but I just continue to develop. I play bishop takes f5, and now he tries queen to e2. Like, he's not able to castle. He's not able to develop his queen side. He probably should try to remove the blockader on d3, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm never going to move it. Now, I castled. I do, again, just want to point out, like, the computer idea is to play moves like b6, after something, play a5. Like, let's say they castle, you play a5. And this, like, basically traps this knight by force. Computer wants you to just give it up. Like, if you play a4, we always have the option of playing bishop here. The knight is still trapped. I'm just pointing this out because it's kind of ridiculous. Are you going to play rook to a3? Are you going to run into the same diagonal as my bishop? Are you going to try to go here, and then if I unpin, are you going to sacrifice your rook? Like, it's really bad, and so bad, computer says you should just toss your knight away. You lost it, you might as well get a pawn for it. So there's all these ideas kind of lurking in the position. But after we got to here, this did not happen. After I took back here, he played queen to e2. I castled on the queen side. This is, of course, also very strong, but just keep in mind this idea of potentially trying to trap the knight, which could be a very useful idea for future games. He takes back, and I took back with my rook. Taking back with the pawn is also insanely strong, but I was very inspired by the famous game, maybe you know it, Louis Paulson versus Paul Morphy. You know the game where Paul Morphy had a rook on d3 and all of these pieces were shut out. That's what I was trying to emulate, and I felt good about it, and I just have a very dominant position. Now, the opponent tries to get a knight out. I had a quick thought, like, okay, where is this knight going? Why did he play knight a3? And I'm looking at the squares. Where's he going to go? And I thought to myself, oh, he is probably trying to go to c2 so that he can remaneuver to e3 and maybe put some pressure on my bishop. I thought, okay, that makes sense. I decided to take on f3. But in this position, after he takes back, I did not go for the pawn right away. I thought if I go here, he might be able to play pawn to d4. This is the kind of thing I'm trying to avoid. I have him pinned in. This might be very, very good for me, but I don't see any reason to ever allow this bishop to get out. So no matter how bad this is for white, I just simply don't want to allow it. So I make a normal developing move. I just want to get my pieces into the game. And I had figured that he was probably going to c2. This is where I thought the opponent was going. So I take this opportunity to take the pawn now that I'm attacking this knight. So there's no time to play d4. You have to move your knight away, which is exactly what he did. But now I plug the bishop into d3, and now I start thinking of how I could possibly checkmate the opponent. The bishop is very strong there, preventing the king from coming up, and I'm thinking to myself at this moment, is there any way to get a checkmate? Can I get two rooks lined up on the f-file and then somehow remove this knight? I don't know. This guy's going to have to get out of the way. Maybe I can get him out of the way, and maybe I can try to get some sort of checkmating attack. Well, the opponent comes up with knight to a5. This is a very good move. The knight is going to be coming to c4, where it supports this guy. This is one of the pieces that I'm going to be trying to remove I'm trying to remove the defender on e3. So having another knight that can come in is an excellent idea. I play bishop to d6. I'm kind of thinking in my head, maybe I'll have some opportunity to go and take this with my bishop in some line, but I also have the idea that I'm very comfortable in this position if white wants to trade on d6. I don't need that bishop. I need to remove the defender of this guy. So I just continue with rook to f8, and now we're starting to see some of this alignment. If I can only get rid of these defenders, I'm going to be able to potentially deliver a very strong attack on white. Now my bishop gets captured. I just simply retake, and after b3, opponent still needs a lot of time to find some sort of square to get this bishop out in order to connect the rooks or castle. He's getting there. He's almost there. But now I play knight to d5, which does not blunder a knight, of course. My idea is I'm trying to remove this defender, so I'd be very happy if you took. Thank you for the checkmate is what I would be saying to the opponent. But instead of falling for that, he, of course, develops his bishop, and this gives me time to remove this defender. And after this, I'm able to deliver this check. Now, I did kind of overlook some that after I took this knight, this king would be able to go here and everything would be defended. But we're about to enter into an endgame that is also kind of funny, because after this forced sequence, basically, I take, he takes back, I drop my bishop back. We can see that I am just completely dominating in this endgame. And this is kind of like he was tied up all middle game. Now he's going to be tied up all endgame, because if you just kind of take a quick peek, my rook is significantly better than his rook. I'm on the only open file. My bishop is better than his bishop. His bishop is staring at a wall currently. And my king actually has the potential to come up a lot farther than his king. Also, because I'm up a pawn, I have a majority on one of the sides of the board. Here it's a 2-on-1. So in the future, I have some potential of going over and making a queen. And all of these things kind of happened. He plays rook e1, so that if I check him, he's able to go here. I start to bring in the king. He plays b4. And I want to keep the wall, so I play b6. I let you capture, I take back. This guy is still trapped in the game. I just try to improve my pieces as much as possible. He puts his pawn here, which keeps my king out and maybe lets his bishop in at some future time. It seems very reasonable. But after some moves, I also want to just restrict everything going on in the back rank as much as possible. But at some point, I begin pushing these pawns. And it's really hard. Like, how does white even stop it? He's just been kind of tied up and worse this entire time with really no hope. Like, he has to keep doing random moves. He's just playing like random moves because there's nothing really for white to even try. Well, he now sees that this is my main idea, is to keep pushing all of these guys. So he needs to use his bishop somehow in order to get into the game and blockade these guys. But even that is not such an easy task. I have all of these main squares. Like, white wishes the bishop were somewhere over here. Like, if the bishop were on h4, maybe there would be some sort of blockade. But there's no way to really get there. Well, he comes up with this, which has the idea of eventually coming in. Maybe this bishop will be able to get to f4. But I kind of saw now that the bishop would just not be in time. I was able to play g3. After this retakes, he's trying to get the bishop in there in time. I thought about some clever tactics here, but I just thought, you know what? The easiest solution is just simply to push this pawn. And if the bishop goes here, I can just put my rook here. And I'm going to either take your bishop, you can try to blockade, but I'll still take your bishop. You move away, I make a queen, and that's why he decided to resign. So play the Kevitz Gambit, and if you like this game, please subscribe.